All right, thank you everyone for your patience. We've now officially cybered this and we're gonna get started. For those of you on the side, because I know we have a lot of people that are standing in the doorway, if you're on the side, can you move forward just a little bit? And then if everybody can just kind of come into the room so that we don't have people standing out in the narthex there. Come on, we're all friends. Just cuddle up, we're good.
There are also some seats at the front of the room still available for those of y'all that are not scared.
And there are a couple up front next to Kat too, if anybody wants to sit there, that's fine. All right, so we're gonna get started. If you've noticed, they make the attorney speak first because they want to make sure I get all of everything I want to say out of the way, and that if there's enough time for them, that they can speak as well. So with that as we kick off, first, thank you for coming. As you can see, we've got standing room only, and we're really excited to present to you on the topic today, securing the warfighter's advantage, resilience in a high threat environment. We're primarily going to be focusing on advancing technologies and how they impact the warfighter. So with me today, I've got Mr. Chuck Weisenborn, who I'll allow to introduce himself, and Ms. Kat Wang. So Chuck, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Chuck Weisenborn. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Dragos Public Sector. We're an organization focused on safeguarding civilization by securing our nation's most critical infrastructure. I had the privilege of being with Dragos since 2020. Many of you guys may also know me, my other hat as a National Guardsman out of the phenomenal state of West Virginia. Nothing I say today represents the views of the Department of Defense, the National Guard, or any other organization that I may be associated with. Did I do that right, Michael?
Legally sufficient.
Sweet.
So that's how you know it's going to be a spicy session. So my name is Kat Wang. I go by Kat because we're in cyber and ain't nobody got time for 3 syllables, am I right? I am the principal of our public sector division within Sandbox AQ, and we do a lot of great things, none of which you all are gonna remember, so I'm gonna tell you 2 things that you will. Number 1, yes, I did dress like Robert E. Lee and Emperor Palpatine had a baby today. And secondly, I talk very fast, so get ready for a lot of pop culture references and scary stories. Let's get started.
And my name is Mike McLaughlin. I co-lead the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Practice Group at the law firm of Buchanan, Ingersoll & Rooney, specialized in cybersecurity incident response preparedness for both private sector and public-facing companies. So with that in mind, we're going to jump right into this. When we look at cybersecurity, and as it specifically relates to the warfighter, we have it wrong. And so I'm going to start with saying that and recognizing that as we look at cybersecurity writ large for the warfighter, we are looking at the wrong things. So with that in mind, everyone in here, as we think through from a cybersecurity perspective, what are your primary concerns? What are the things that you're most interested in when we're trying to send rounds downrange? Communications is certainly one of them, but it's also everything that supports communications amongst the warfighters. It's everything that supports the defense supply chain. It's everything that supports how we conduct our operations, whether it's supply chain, whether it's the critical infrastructure that's supporting our bases, or as we move forward, whether it's the critical Internet of Things or Internet of Military Things that we'll talk about here shortly, all of which we are going to come to rely critically upon. So as we look at what is the strength of our warfighter, it depends on all of the different capabilities that are enabling us to send forces downrange to defend our national security. Critical infrastructure is one of them, certainly. And as we'll get into in a second, critical infrastructure comprises 16 different sectors. If everything is critical, nothing is critical. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is as we focus on operational technology, what we're going to recognize is that the cybersecurity construct that we have within the private sector primarily, and that the government and the Department of Defense in particular is pushing down to defense contractors, is focusing on the wrong thing. Everyone here is familiar with the CIA triad. Remember this point as we go forward. The third thing, supply chain integrity. Understanding that we need to have a complete view of our supply chain so that we can root out any harm that our adversaries may be willing or looking to cause to us is equally as important. I just did a presentation for a group of Finnish companies that are primarily focused on developing new icebreakers for the Coast Guard. One of the questions that came up was, when we are developing our technology, how much of it actually has to be manufactured in Europe for it to be a European product? The question was getting to, How much Chinese tech can we actually put into our product before it's called Chinese, and before we have tripwires that the Department of Defense is going to be looking at to say, wait a minute, this is Chinese made, this wasn't made in Finland? That's a problem. And that's a problem. It's one of vagaries. It's one of fuzziness, let's say. Supply chain integrity is critically important. And then the third aspect that we look at when we say the strength of our warfighter is certainly in secure communications amongst our warfighters and amongst our decision makers. But you'll notice that there's another point up there: data. As we continue to move forward into an AI-driven environment, the primary function that we are going to have when it comes to securing our critical technology and it comes to securing our ability to project force downrange is going to be having high-quality data that is secure. We focus very heavily on the confidentiality aspect of the CIA triad. I'm going to implore you to start looking at the integrity and the availability much more. So let's dive into it. What are some of the threats that we've seen? And on the screen, it dives into Chinese solar inverters. And oh, by the way, these slides are going to be available if anybody wants them after the fact. Please come and talk to myself, Chuck, or Kat. But Chinese inverters, and this is one example that I'm going to give. How many people, just show of hands, are familiar with the Chinese inverters, what was discovered earlier this year? A couple in the room. So I'll give you a very brief overview. It should come as no surprise that when we have Chinese manufactured technology in our critical infrastructure, that there are going to be backdoors in that technology. We have seen it time and time again over the past 30 years. Well, guess what? Critical infrastructure, primarily electric grid, is no different. Earlier this year, it was discovered that the Chinese had been putting backdoors or remote management tools into their solar inverters that were then being fielded across massive solar fields on which our electric grid relies across many of our southern states. What this gave the Chinese government primarily, and I'll get to this in a second, but gave the Chinese government primarily was access through remote management to bypass any of the firewalls, any of the security protocols that may have been in place in that operational technology. Why is that important? Well, for obvious reasons, we don't want the Chinese in our electric grid. If you change certain things when it comes to solar inverters, you can cause rolling blackouts across massive regions. You can inject harmful or kinetic effects into these inverters. The Chinese government isn't just doing this from the perspective of they want to have backdoors or they're utilizing their offensive cyber capabilities. This is done by law. As a lawyer, I love reading Chinese law. It's one of my favorite pastimes. If anybody else is interested, I've got some great books for you. I think I'm the only one in the room who's actually interested in this, so I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version. Going back to 2015, the Chinese government began implementing a series of laws designed to give access to the Chinese government for any company that's either operating in China or is incorporated in China. This was the problem with TikTok. The fact that ByteDance, the parent company, was incorporated in China gave the Chinese government, by law, unfettered access to all of the data that TikTok was collecting, as well as to be able to direct all of the operations of that company. Now, take that and put it on to critical infrastructure. If we're concerned about the Chinese having access to our data via TikTok, we should be terrified about Chinese cyber or the Chinese government having access to our critical infrastructure. And that's what this is all about. But the Chinese aren't the only ones in the game. When if I said, name our top 4 adversaries, I think everyone in the room would be able to say China, Russia, Iran, North Korea as our top 4. And when it comes to cyber, we'd probably throw in cyber criminals in there as well. Well, each one of our adversaries are focused on something just slightly different, but each one of them has a capability to go after critical infrastructure. The Chinese with solar inverters, amongst others. The Iranians most recently went after the Aliquippa municipal water facility in western Pennsylvania as a result of that critical infrastructure operator simply using Israeli software. A regional conflict expanded into a global cyber fight targeting our critical infrastructure because that's what the Iranian government was utilizing their proxies to do, to try to undermine our critical infrastructure. The Russians we've seen time and time again in Ukraine using either wiperware or other types of capabilities against Ukrainian critical infrastructure, and we've seen the efficacy of that. What about cybercrime? Colonial Pipeline. It could be inadvertent. Colonial Pipeline was a result of a ransomware group going after and encrypting the networks of that company. They didn't actually take down the pipeline. That was done by the company as a result of the encryption of their network. They were trying to contain the incident. Somewhat self-inflicted, but cyber crime and criminal groups can have just as much of an impact against critical infrastructure as our adversaries, and it's something that we need to be keenly aware of. Because guess what our networks and guess what our electric grid that powers all of our bases rides on? Private sector companies. And Chuck's going to get into this and scare the hell out of you. Why we need to be keenly focused on all of these adversaries, each one of them has a different MO. The Chinese are primarily or historically have looked at intellectual property theft, but that's pivoted now to focusing on critical infrastructure. Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon. The Iranians have expanded beyond their traditional regional focus against either Saudi Arabia or Israel and are now much more aggressively targeting US critical infrastructure. While the Russians have been very busy in Ukraine, they are also finding ways into US critical infrastructure, such as solar winds. And the only one I haven't named is North Korea. Anybody know why? What is North Korea's primary target? Money. Money. North Korea is focused on generating revenue to support their regime. Right now, we're not so much focused on them from a critical infrastructure perspective, but they have shown the ability to target companies in the US, primarily Sony Pictures, just prior to the movie The Interview coming out, which if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's hilarious. So when we look at the vulnerabilities that we have across the board, and we'll talk about IoT, we'll talk about AI, we'll talk about the advancing technologies, but we look at operational technology. And this is where the warfighter really comes in. Operational technology is the way of the future, and it's something that we are very much ignoring at the present. How many people enjoy CMMC or hearing about CMMC? No hands. So CMMC, what's the problem with it? What does it focus on? Controlled unclassified information, right? Controlled unclassified information that's stored on private sector networks. That's the C. That's the confidentiality of the CIA triad. If all we're focusing on is confidentiality, we're focusing on the wrong thing, because operational technology relies on the availability, the uptime, and the integrity of the data on which those systems are relying. Because we're focused so much on confidentiality in the private sector, and with understanding the software bills of material and understanding zero trust within an information technology environment, we're largely excluding operational technology. So how do we resolve this? Well, cryptography is one of the key ways, but it's not just cryptography, because as I alluded to earlier, with respect to critical technology or critical infrastructure, we have 16 different sectors. I have 8 different bosses, Bob. If everything is critical, nothing is critical. So you can't just deploy encryption broadly across every network, nor do you want the same protocols being used for latency, for access to the data, for privilege purposes. You need to be able to focus on what are the primary roles and what are the primary functions of the technology that we're trying to encrypt. What is the data? What is the importance of it? Encryption from a tactical perspective is critically important, but it has to be the right type of encryption. What we've seen is even the NIST post-quantum standards are subject to attack by AI. This has nothing to do with the quantum computer being able to break that mathematical protocol. This is AI finding side channel attacks into those systems and into those algorithms. As a result, we need to very much focus on what are the capabilities that we have, what do we need to be post-quantum, versus what is good enough at this point, and prioritize and begin moving into a very post-quantum environment. The final thing on here, and what we're going to see, or at least for my part, as we look across the board, across the spectrum of what needs to be prioritized from an encryption perspective, we have listed on here several capabilities. Each one of you can think about your own unit, can think about your own company and your own entity. What are the primary functions that you have that need to be protected? Certainly, it's going to be on the information side and classification, classified materials, controlled unclassified information, things that give us the military edge against our adversaries. But it's also going to be things like logistics and sustainment. It's going to be what are those things that if they went down, we would not be able to function. In the book, The Bomber Mafia, Malcolm Gladwell goes into ball bearing factories and the targeting of ball bearing factories as an example of high-level aerial bombing versus targeted daytime bombing against the Nazis. What he was focused on was, what are those centers of gravity? What are those critical functions within a supply chain that if taken out, they would have cascading effects that would significantly impact our ability to deliver force downrange? That's the type of thing that we need to be focusing on from a prioritization perspective within defense critical infrastructure. So now I'm going to pause. I'm going to turn it over to I'm going to turn it over to Kat to start diving into some of these solutions.
As Kat comes to the podium, I just want to point out that nowhere on this slide of things that we should really care about from a data perspective are building temperature set points and things of that nature. There is an overemphasis on encryption because it's what we're used to talking about and it's the easy button. But as the slide said, we have to prioritize what we actually encrypt and what we actually care about.
Thanks for that downer, Mike. Appreciate that. I'm going to just see that with a little bit more options for you if you don't already have plenty of reasons to drink. So let's talk about AI. All right. So armor and artillery, that is what we are. We are also now algorithms and AI, right? So I think we all accept and understand that the PRC or Russia, any of the other adversaries that Michael just mentioned, they don't need to necessarily outgun us in a physical environment if they can outmaneuver us in a cyber one. So as we think about everything that your lives are hitting on, and probably not only the vendors outside, but the conversations that you're having today, AI is now being force-fed into all of our platforms. And if not, then at least probably a lot of the supply chain vendors that we have to work with on a daily basis. My point here is not necessarily to deter us from using AI. It's absolutely critical. I would argue that not everything really that says it's AI is AI, but we're just going to ignore that for a minute, assuming that the AI that we are working with and considering is truly AI and embedding in our systems. We need to also acknowledge that AI is emergent, right? Many examples are showing how AI technology exhibits emergent behavior. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but the fundamental three things that I would keep in mind for AI is if we think that we can predict the permutations in which AI could produce, we would be wrong. If we think that we can anticipate or produce as many guardrails as necessary to keep them in line, we would also be wrong. And if we think that trust can ever be assumed by AI, we would also be horribly wrong. I'm going to talk about AI in relation to zero trust in a minute. So let's take a look at examples of where AI has shown emergent behavior, and then I'm going to link it back to some of the challenges that we have securing a warfighter advantage. All right, who was alive in 1988? Yay, fantastic. All right, Morris worm, originally developed in partnership with the US government and academia, was created to survey the size of the internet back in the 80s. Well, it ended up getting out, infecting 10,000 or more computers and causing a global shutdown. Oops. Not intended consequence, right? Emergent behavior. Back in the 80s, it's almost 50 years ago now. Stuxnet, the first public example of OT intrusion, right? I got a gentleman over there nodding his head. So originally developed by the US government to disrupt critical infrastructure with the nuclear subterfuges within Iran, ended up going a little bit beyond its bounds and infecting other nations' infrastructure as well. The third, last year, I cannot believe this was last year, ChatGPT 2024 was given a set of prompts to determine the boundaries of its programmatic capabilities, right? What can it do from a pragmatic standpoint? So given a list of prompts to stay within its sandbox and then capture the flag, it exploited a Docker misconfiguration, ended up leaving its sandbox environment against its prompt to go retrieve the tag and bring it the tag and bring it back. So when prompted and understanding why AI chooses to make these decisions as an order of like psychological sequential behavior, as basic responses as, oh, we thought that the prompter would be angry if we didn't, was the response. Emergent behavior. Like I said, if we think that we can anticipate all of the permutations that AI can produce in order to execute a prompt, we would be wrong. All right. So let's take a look actually at how this relates to OT, because Michael mentioned that before. August 5th, a lot of crazy shit has happened in this month alone. August 5th, hackers found a way to exploit Gemini. Who heard about this? Okay, hackers found a way to exploit Gemini by reading calendar invites with plain English in the subject matter and malware code embedded in the description. Right? So you've put that in someone's calendar, you have Gemini summarize your calendar invite, and next thing you know, the hackers are able to turn the lights off, open windows, and turn on a broiler. Right? So smart homes, like we have to be thinking about why AI exists and what we're putting it in for and whether or not it's actually necessary. And the OT Trojan side point, we're really thinking about, and there were a lot of different reasons for cyber actors and different flavors of why they do what they do. A lot of times it is to disrupt, it is to disorient, it is to destroy. Sometimes it's just about data exfiltration, right? So as we think about the collision between offensive and defensive, between AI and cryptography, between data and intelligence, we also need to acknowledge that this AI integration into a lot of our platforms is also widening our threat aperture significantly. August 6th is another example. Hackers use poison ChatGPT file to exfiltrate data without any prompt. No user interaction, it just allowed it to happen. August 9th, jailbreaks and agent flare, zero-day exploits enable data theft from AI agents integrated within cloud and IoT. So this is a force multiplication of threats on threats. And that's just data exfiltration. If it were me and I had the patience to play a long game, I would start poisoning AI data. Because apparently all it takes is one pixel of a difference to make it difficult for AI to determine the difference between, a missile launcher and a civilian truck. 1 pixel, that's all it takes, right? So cryptography and securing the data layer for any of the instances where the cyber adversaries are trying to exfiltrate data out through cyber vulnerabilities that exist within operational technology, within critical infrastructure, is absolutely a table stakes game that I would expect to be happening today. One other thing, Michael said this earlier, if everything is important, nothing is important. I'm gonna object to that a little bit and say it's still everything is important. And in the relation to the data, I'll give you an example why. You absolutely should prioritize. Take a look at your tranches and take a look at your high value assets and then figure out what needs to be done and what order. However, you might be wondering, well, what about data that has a shelf life of 15 minutes? Does it really matter safeguarding the data, the temperature in this room? Turns out, psychology, we should talk. I like your head nods. It's like you know where I'm going with this. Turns out, psychologically, if you increase the temperature by 1 degree, 2 degrees in a room where people are used to having a certain level of homeostasis, you can disrupt their sleep. You can disrupt their energy levels. You can disrupt just the harmony within the room. People start to get a little bit more ornery. They start to have big feelings, and then fist fights break out, and then you lose control of the environment because of behavioral settings due to the fact that AI is tampering with the sensors within the thermostat in the room. So think about bigger picture things where data exfiltration of something that ordinarily would be benign would have catastrophic considerations. All right, this brings me to my final point, zero trust. Zero trust was built for a human-centric world, and AI came in and broke that. So as we think about the fact that machine-to-machine connections now outnumber human access 40,000 to 1, we absolutely should be applying zero trust principles to everything, both human and non-human identities. Okay, I think that was it. I'm gonna hand it over to Chuck to close us out.
All right, y'all ready? Ooh, man, my Texan came out there, didn't it? So we've been having the same conversation for the past, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, right? That tired conversation about prioritization and vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. It's too much. It's really complicated and it's hard to do. And unfortunately, we're too late to keep having the same tired, pedantic conversation. And to be quite honest, in an enterprise that spans hundreds of thousands of individual facilities and buildings, it's a bridge too far to accomplish everything that we woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? So let's dial this down a little bit from the tech, from everything else, and let's talk about every military officer's favorite conversation, readiness. Everybody love readiness? Who loves DERZA? Huh? Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, here we go. From a show of hands, who's been doing USRs since you used to have to do them on floppy disk? Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna put my hand down on that one. Whew, boy, that's old. All right, readiness. Readiness begins and ends with requirements. You don't have a mission, you don't have a medal, you don't have people unless you have a requirement. And we don't have good requirements, clearly, because we still are talking about the same problems. So fundamentally, for critical infrastructure, for operational technology, for AI, so on and so forth, we've got to get better at our requirements process, which starts at the combatant commands, not at the cyber leaders level. It's our job to advise those commanders and those planners. It's their job to actually put the requirements in so that we generate the appropriate forces to be able to put into the fight when and where we need them. Readiness drives command behaviors. It is the only thing that is going to really change the paradigm when it comes to what we focus on and where we spend our time. We've talked about a lot of bad things. I'm going to talk about some more. So there are over 4,500, quote, traditional, unquote, power generation plants in the United States. Nuclear, coal, hydroelectric, oil, natural gas, fuel burning, right? When I talked at RSA in 2023, I surveyed LinkedIn across the entire globe, and there were 912 people with the SANS, OT, ICS, GIAC certification for critical infrastructure incident response. That is a heck of a lot less than 4,500. But, well, Chuck, we're not going to see like a big widespread cyber hack, right? Well, reverse a couple years now, and we had this malware called PipeDream. PipeDream is a set of malware capabilities that could impact multiple critical infrastructure sectors and attack some of the foundational building blocks that are used in almost every single one of those 4,500 electric power generation plants that I just mentioned. So our drive to more homogeneous technology, our drive to lower price, and by lowering, the way that we're lowering price is by purchasing large amounts of the same components, has actually been detrimental to our security and our ability to safeguard civilization. That common hardware presents an adversary with a very easily identifiable attack surface, and one that if they do and focus on one thing, they get a large amount of return for their investment. There are programs that the government executes on. The Department of Energy's Citrix program is an example of this, where the government is actually helping industry identify those vulnerable attack surfaces ahead of component release into the marketplace. That is something that we should be supporting across multiple sectors, right? Because it'll at least help us start getting a little bit ahead of the game. But honestly, the worst day is that we just don't have the people necessary to help. And we don't have the people, not just with the knowledge, like from a technical standpoint, but the knowledge of these power plants, their specific systems, their people, what's required to get access into these facilities. And we don't have to do it all, right? But we do need to do the ones that are critical in our mission kill chains. All right, here's some more spicy stuff. Attribution. Attribution is not required to help somebody respond to an incident. Attribution is not required to address common adversary kill chains and the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we know adversaries have to use to compromise some of these environments. Attribution is important, however, to enable DoD support to non-DoD mission partners. If any of you guys are familiar with Title 10 United States Code, Chapter 19, Cyber Authorities, you might be familiar with the statement that says the Department of Defense will defend the United States and U.S. persons against foreign cyber threats. Did anybody in here who's a .mil person raise their hand to do something other than defending the United States and U.S. persons against foreign threats? I didn't think so. So from a policy standpoint, and this gets to kind of the policy paralysis perspective, did you know that there are people who believe that it is not the role of the United States military to defend the United States and U.S. persons against foreign cyber threats? They would rather leave that up to private citizens to defend themselves against a foreign military organization. As a military service member in my National Guard hat, as a member of the United States populace, that offends me deeply. Military versus military, yes? Yes? Thank you. Oh, by the way, policy, yeah. That is the DD-214 blanket equivalent for every OGC and 06 and above who is provided the opportunity to do something new and meaningful against an adversary. There are very few leaders that are brave enough right now to actually start doing what needs to get done to get after this problem. We're blessed that we do have some of those leaders in the right places for the moment. However, we have to take that bravery and that courage, and we need to codify it into policy and statute so that people don't have to be afraid or don't have to feel like they're taking risk to defend the United States and US persons against a foreign military threat. And on the money side of the house, we can have all the policy, all the intentions, all the good, yummy goodness we could want, but if we don't have resources that are aligned and dedicated to the problem set, we're never going to actually get after the problems. This is why you see people gripe about misuse of resources, misalignment of resources. Thankfully, though, this is also why we have an organization called CAPE in the DoD who can reprogram money to the important things. So don't necessarily write your congressman or congresswoman, write the people at CAPE. All right, what do we need to do on the policy side? The single most important thing that we can do writ large is to be clear and concise to the point of things being almost impossible to misinterpret. For a long time, there was legal precedence, I'm on you, that policy could be interpreted very broadly, right? Like government organizations could go past the point of what was specifically written in law to do their jobs and support our citizens. That got thrown out. That was, I think, United States versus Chevron, right? There you go. And now government organizations are kind of in this box to where, like, if it's not written specifically, we can't do it, which means we need to get specific. We talked about CMC earlier. CMC is data focused. That's cool. Did you know there's data that's important to the mission in our operational technology systems? The mixtures and measures of all the different components that make our energetics and munitions, the plans for, say, the sheet metal, the carbon fiber, and all the other different types of components for our next generation fighter aircraft. All of those things are within OT. So if we're not protecting OT, we're also not protecting that aspect of data. So we may as well just say, hey guys, data in OT is under the applicability of CMMC. It'll do us all a favor, and I don't know, maybe it'll do something against our adversaries, maybe. We also should stop letting policy drive the ship. Today, largely, leaders will wait for policy to give them the thumbs up and the head nod that, yes, you can do this thing. We need to tell policy we are going to do this thing and enable us to do it. Ops leads, policy supports. And finally, as I've talked to some of my other colleagues out and about, I ask folks a question. What is your mission doing to align with the national security and the national defense strategy? Anybody want to take a hack at what like the number one thing in the national defense strategy is? I think it's like this defend the homeland deal, right? How about the national cyber strategy, the defense cyber strategy? I think it's also kind of like defend the homeland stuff, right? But the one mission that we should be doing, which is supporting our fellow countrymen against foreign military cyber threats in the homeland, we're not doing. So if you're doing a mission that's really cool and awesome and sexy, it could be the greatest thing ever. But if it's not aligned to that number one, and if it's not protecting our communities and our citizens, and if somebody else is not doing the thing that could cause more harm to our adversaries than any other thing that we could do, you might want to look around about how we're prioritizing. Securing OT, securing critical infrastructure. It's all about making our adversaries' lives harder. Today, our adversaries don't have to come up with awesome, super creative attacks to get into our infrastructure because we're barely doing the not even bare minimum to posture those systems to be a challenge. Our adversaries should be having to expend their sexiest, hardest developed 0 days and tactics, techniques, and procedures every time they want to get into a system that's critical to the safety and security of our nation and its citizens. And today, because we still have folks that are using password $123 as their password, and that's not just in private sector, folks, it's still happening within other realms, we're not making them work harder, okay? So let's talk about money. Nobody likes to spend money. It's hard to spend money. Actually, it's hard, well, we'll get into that later. We have gone lowest cost technical acceptable in a lot of different ways. We have made decisions such as outsourcing our backup power generations on installations perhaps to private sector utilities that have resulted in the DoD not owning its own resiliency. And from a cyber perspective, being reliant upon these private sector companies to accomplish the DoD's mission sets. So not only do we not own our own resiliency, but we are also not going to support those private sector partners outside the wire because maybe that's Homeland Security, not Homeland Defense. Let's pray about that for a minute. When we talk about OT and we talk about supply chain, and we talk about the centralization of services that we have driven towards in the DoD, we have created very juicy, very attractive targets for our adversaries. So as we think about where we should spend our time, energy, effort, right? It's on the kill chains that are most important to us, but it also needs to be on the high value, high dollar targets that we have created. And then we need to determine if that was the smartest thing to do. I'll close one by thanking Kat for her acknowledgement of cognitive warfare, right? That's a whole new domain. And it's a domain where, just like OT, physics, cyber, everything else all come together to do some really nasty things the adversaries can do to us. As we start doing the right things, as we make our adversaries' lives harder, just know we haven't seen anything yet, right? Adversaries haven't had to expose their really serious stuff because they just don't have to, but we need to start making them. So let's get to the point where we start seeing some truly novel things happen. Let's put our adversaries into the position of being uncomfortable when they step across our digital borders. And let's make sure that when the balloon goes up, that we're ready. And we're going to do that by securing our critical technologies and by ensuring the warfighter is fully enabled to do what they need to do. I'm happy to take a few questions. I think we're right at time or maybe a minute over. So thank you guys so much.
So I can tell this is a hot room. You guys got to have some questions. So if anybody wants to stay, ask them. And if not, and anybody wants access to these slides, come find us after. Anything?
Where's Mr. Vaughn? Mr. Vaughn's got to have a question. Where's Dave Vaughn? You here? He said he was going to heckle me. Chief Rapp, I know you got a question, sir. Come on. No? Not going to touch this? Sir, go for it.
You touched on that intertwined interplay between DoD and our supported resilience infrastructure off those. But how do you, I agree with you, right? Military versus military, but how do you ensure that those private sector commercial entities are doing the proper investments in their own cybersecurity rather than just trying to rely on maybe coming in and save them from attacks?
Yeah, so private companies do have the onus to resource themselves. However, there are some utility partners that are in a unique situation where because they are regulated, they are unable to actually increase their billable rates to cover additional costs. So the DoD is not the solution for everything. However, where there's a nexus of defense critical infrastructure, a foreign threat actor, and an under-resourced, underprivileged provider, we should at least offer up support, right? We cannot force ourselves down anybody's throat, right? We should not force ourselves down anybody's throat. However, we should be an option for those who cannot help themselves to the degree that they need to, right? And there are some unique things that the military can do that our private sector companies may not be able to do. So there are some military unique things, information intelligence, things like that, that others don't have access to that we also can lend to the fight that we're not doing at a scale now. So I think that that's another way of helping get after some of the problems.
When you look at the intersections of installation management command, Army material command, and our cyber, it seems like we're not funding appropriately an organization to be able to do the insourcing that you speak of, or outsourcing too much. When you talk with folks in those three organizations, what are you finding? Or what would you suggest to them as the solution? Because I think that we have the resident capability existing in our structure, but we're probably just not funding them properly.
Yeah, so we have to reset our strategy a little bit on resiliency, right? I think that has to come from the ASA / ASD level, because for the longest we had this big push in the installation energy environment community to outsource, right? And we do need to probably figure out what the appropriate level of that really should be. If we're going to outsource our prime power, awesome. But our backup systems, to have them controlled by the same company as our prime power, controlled over the same telecommunications lines as our prime power, from the same control center as our prime power, isn't resiliency. It's just a single threat at that point. So it's got to start from our senior leaders saying, hey, like, the DoD must be able, oh, that sounds like a requirement. The DoD must be able to do X in order to do Y. There you go, requirements.
Yep.
Chuck, so in your estimation, does the DoD have the capacity and the expertise to achieve what you're proposing?
All right, so let's talk about resiliency from an energy perspective alone. We have phenomenally talented engineers within the Department of Defense. Air Force, Nate's an Air Force guy from background, right? If y'all don't know him, he's an amazing human being. The Air Force has civil engineering squadrons that actually usually run their own power on installation. The Army gave up a lot of those folks when we went to privatization. However, we still have a lot of engineers that we're not tapping into on a daily basis within the ranks. From a cyber perspective, we have amazing freaking people. Amazing people. But we don't have enough of them, right? And they're not necessarily focused on some of these. We don't have enough people focused, right, in this area of critical infrastructure, AI. There's not even career fields for these things yet, per se. So I feel like we're living in this paradigm where the Army as a service, right, is dealing with the inflexibilities of Human Resources Command, its traditional systems, as are the other services, right? But this is an Army conference. And, you know, I think that we've got to look at what that paradigm looks like to enable that flexibility that we need to be able to grow these kind of capabilities in short order when we have emerging threats like this. This isn't going to be the first time that this is going to happen, the last time this is going to happen, right? Like, what's the big after AI? First we had cloud, now we have the critical infrastructure conversations, we're having the AI security conversations. Something's coming up, something's going to be next, right? Oh, hey, yeah. Had to go there, didn't you? Had to go there. But yeah, we don't have enough people. They're not focused. We don't have enough people focused on the area. And I mean, how much training is there that's even focused on this to the degree that we need to, right? Traditional cyber training for critical infrastructure is really targeted on like introductory incident response. But how many of our cyber folks are we sending to Johnson Controls to take their class about Metasys, right? If you don't know the systems for this stuff, like, you're not able to fight on that system. CISA. CISA's an amazing organization with great people, love them to death. They have a very specific mandate, and their broad spectrum is a lot of times focused more on assessment, risk understanding, cybersecurity for federal government organizations. But when you get to the outside the wire, yes, they're a sector risk management agency for what, 6 of the 16 sectors, I think, plus or minus. But even sector risk management agencies, you know, a lot of times feel like they don't have the authorities to actually hands-on keyboard help, right? They can go, they can support people in understanding what their vulnerabilities are. But if they're those underprivileged folks, like, they may not have the direct authorities to actually go hands-on keyboard. Should they? We should always have options, right? They also don't have the sufficient number of people if we're talking about a truly large-scale incident. So no matter where we are in space or time, no matter, you know, what CISA's shape is in at the current point in place in history, they're still not going to have enough people if there is something that is large scale. And for the most part, the DoD is probably the only scalable resource that we've got within the country, because folks in private sector are going to be focused on putting out the fires in their own backyards. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question. CISA does have an important role. The stuff that they're doing with vulnerability publishing, supporting that information flow, and actually going to some of the most vulnerable areas in the United States, they have made meaningful differences, but they're only one organization that has only so many people.
But Chuck, to that point, CISA, that's also not their remit. That's not the focus of why CISA exists. It's not supposed to be an incident response team for critical infrastructure. Yep. It's largely why they deactivated their CERT teams. CISA is meant to be the help desk for critical infrastructure and the focal point for cyber incident reporting for critical infrastructure in the federal government. They are still trying to find themselves. They were established in 2018, and since 2018, we had Congress pass CIRCIA, or the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, which named CISA as the lead federal agency for all cyber incident reporting for the federal government. Yet we still have the SEC, or Securities and Exchange Commission, reporting obligations for publicly traded company. The TSA, which falls under DHS, has their own reporting obligations. And so even within DHS, we don't have a unified approach for cyber incident reporting, let alone incident response. And that's why a lot of what Chuck's talking about with respect to the DoD being the agency or the entity that is properly resourced, properly manned, and properly trained to conduct these operations, it also has to do with the fact that the DoD is the only entity that actually has experience conducting these operations.
So just to emphasize one other thing too, when we say DoD, military against military threat, right? DoD is not the response to everything. Ransomware, criminal activities, those types of things, not even remotely in our purview, in the DoD's purview. However, if it's a military threat and it's a system asset facility that the military relies on to execute its strategic plans and its strategic mission, there's a nexus there where DoD support is probably appropriate. That leaves a whole heck of a lot of things for all the other different organizations, right? The DoD cannot be everybody's solution, cannot be everybody's answer, it should not be. However, there is a place, and it's a very specific place against a very specific thing where it's probably appropriate.
And we have largely failed in that. And SolarWinds is a primary example of this, where you had an attributed Russian offensive cyber operation, whether it was for the purpose of espionage or whether it was for the purpose of pre-deploying kinetic or the equivalent of kinetic weapons for cyber effects, we may never know. But that was a Russian, quote unquote, uniformed service. It was their SVR conducting an operation, putting backdoors in 18,000 US companies vis-a-vis SolarWinds. The DoD was not involved. And SolarWinds then had charges brought against its CISO by the SEC. So not only are we putting it on the private sector, but we are now punishing the private sector when they fail to do certain things, even when it's a nation state attacking them.
Yeah.
And that also comes to the construct that we currently have within our cyber forces. Right now, the cyber mission force broadly is a Title 10 organization. We do have Title 32 capabilities within the National Guard, but it's not a coordinated effort between those Title 10 forces and the Title 32 forces. Not only that, but our Title 10 forces can't conduct law enforcement activities, which is required if it is determined that is a criminal act. And at which point do we have that handover between Title 18 law enforcement personnel, primarily the FBI, and DoD, and vice versa? Those lanes in the road are not clearly established because we're living in an environment where we've got silos from an authority's perspective that are not easily transmitted or not easily translated into a digital domain. And we have yet to fix that. It could be. I agree. There has to be someone. Yeah.
Who else? Somebody else got something.
We can keep going. We like to hear ourselves talk.
The AFCEA folks haven't given us the hook yet, so going once, going twice. Sold.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.